We've got the signal, we're ready to rock, so thanks everybody for being here. I'm Cap. I'm the host of this panel room for the remainder of the day. I run the Nerdy Show Network. We're a nerd podcast network dedicated to every facet of nerddom. You should check us out at nerdyshow.com. And to my right is Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren the Flute. I play flute. My name is Lauren. Very clever and original here. I lead a video game cover band called The Returners, and I'm really into nerdy stuff. So, hi.
And I'm Adil. I have nothing notable about me as a person. You can remember my name.
That's not true.
That's true. Okay. You can remember my name by thinking Adil Pickle. I work at Fangamer. I do customer service. Chances are, if you've emailed Fangamer in the last couple of months, I have responded.
Do you write the haiku?
No, that's somebody else. I don't know. There's absolutely nothing remarkable about me as a person.
Well, let's talk about something very remarkable then.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about these games. Now, first I want to get a read of the room. How many people here have played Soul Blazer?
Ooh, yeah. Nice.
How many people have played Illusions of Gaia?
All right.
How many people have played Terranigma?
How many people want a copy of Terranigma? all right, there we go.
And how many people have played Mother 3?
Yeah,
that's what I
thought. That's what
all right, so...
Yeah, because I just warning here, there'll be spoilers, so be prepared.
Yeah, we are legitimately going to dig deep into these games because we're talking about a subject that it's really critical on knowing the full scope of the plot to do this. But you don't have to know anything going in. We're gonna take you through all of it and all the high points. So this is essentially a study of a fascinating trope that exists in all of these games. It's personified in this trilogy of games, the Quintet trilogy, which goes by a number of other names. And then also in Mother 3, and it's a uniquely, well, it's something that's shown up in global mythology a lot, but is kind of uniquely Japanese at this point. But we'll get into all that. So let me monologue at you for a little bit. Between 1992 and 1996, the game developer Quintet released this trilogy of remarkable RPGs: Soul Blazer, Illusions of Gaia, oh there we go, on all three of them, and Terranigma. The trilogy is sometimes called Quintet's Creation Trilogy, the Soul Blazer Trilogy, the Gaia Trilogy, or the Heaven and Earth Trilogy. There's a lot of different names for it. That's not even all of them. There's not an official name. Fans just call them things. They don't link up as a continuous story, but they share common themes, specifically the death and rebirth of civilization and the duality of life. These are deep, heavy role-playing games. The themes that are not only shared with the game, we're all here. These themes are shared with Mother 3 in a very profound way as part of a global mythology that offers the 21st century a powerful message about humanity's responsibilities in the cycle of life. So that cycle, animals and plants, they live, they multiply, and in death, nurture life, and ideally balance the environment. Balance is extremely critical and very important. And humans, we're the anomaly to all this, right? We're beholden to life and death, but we have this singular power to manipulate the surroundings on a mass scale, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. Now, in a 1965 interview, the Manhattan Project chief scientist Robert Oppenheimer remarked on seeing the first detonation of a nuclear weapon, codenamed Trinity, in the Jordan del Muerto desert, and here's what he said.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Pretty heavy stuff. Humanity's influence and our machines are powerful tools. Most often than not, they're capable of tipping the world disastrously out of balance. What the Hopi Indians call koyaanisqatsi. the hope that you're one of many cultures that have myths and prophecies about the end of the world and its resurrection. And all of us nerds here in the room, we have those too in powerful pieces of pop culture that channel these cautionary tales. So let's talk about the Quintet Trilogy, these games that some of you have played, which is awesome, and others have not. They're all written, designed, and directed by the president of Quintet, Tomoyoshi Miyazaki. He wasn't always alone, but he was the chief creative force behind all these titles. So we're going to describe them all, the premise of each. And I guess we'll start with 1992's Soul Blazer. You want to take this? Since I've been monologuing.
Oh god, I can do my best to try to summarize. Okay, so Soul Blazer, you take the role of a sort of angelic creature sent down by the master, kind of an omnipotent godlike being. It's like the world has been destroyed and you need to go down and fix it. And so you go through a series of dungeons, rescuing elements of the world and unlocking them, and once you finish rescuing that section, you return to that part of the world, and people are there, animals are there, and slowly becomes like, you know, a civilized community, a civilized town, rather than the emptiness that it had been before. And over the course of the game, your character, the Blazer, who's this kind of angel person, falls in love with a human and gets involved with the scientist and also the king who are responsible for the destruction of the world. The king made a deal with essentially the devil for basically just for gold. Every I think it was every person that gets captured this way, the king gets a gold piece, and for some reason he thought this was a good idea.
Well, also his wife was pressuring him into it or something? Yeah.
And continues to pressure him. So it's a story about you resurrecting the world, and the king kind of having to deal with the consequences of his action, and the scientist who helped make it happen, dealing with the consequences of his action. And at the end of the game, you revive the world, the scientist sacrifices himself to save the world, and your character finds that he misses his human love, and so the master sends him back to Earth as a human without his memories, but he reconnects with his love. Is that a pretty good summary?
Yeah, very thorough, yeah.
So if that was too much.
Adele, I'm gonna let you take Terranigma since it's your one true love.
I can take Illusion of Gaia.
Yeah, you want to do Gaia?
I'll do Gaia.
Go for
All
it.
right. So Illusion of Gaia is the second game in this series, and that was the first one I had played. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So basically, I mean, it's a similar game. It's about, you know, just a boy who is traveling with his friends and just like going on adventures, and you go to different kind of, you know, some of our historical monuments like Angkor Wat, let's see, the Great Wall of China, Egyptian pyramids, and they all have some significance of being part of a destroyed civilization. And the idea that is given in the game is that, you know, once a civilization builds up to a certain point and gets too big, a comet will come and then basically destroy everything and then revert everything kind of back to square one. And it's sort of, it's similar to the idea of Sisyphus, you know, like pushing the rock up the hill. That is the right story, right? Sisyphus. Okay, so yeah, pushing the rock up the hill. And just kind of that futility and kind of that cycle of reaching a certain point, but then having it all come crashing down. And so I think this game also has a lot of stuff about just personal relationships between the characters. It has some just, when I was a kid and I played it, I really hated it in certain points. There's one point where you're just like stuck on a raft with somebody and it's just like really boring and you just kind of have to sit there, but it's like almost like, I don't know.
You learn a lesson.
It's intentional.
It's intentional, and it's almost like supposed to teach you some level of patience and kind of, you know, because, you know, you're stuck on a raft and that's what it's like. It's boring and it's just the same stretch of land or sea. And so, let's see. The way the game ends, though, is that you basically travel to the comet, and you can draw some parallels to Majora's Mask almost, but this game precedes it.
I haven't beaten that one yet.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry.
Okay.
All right, so you travel to the comet, and then you basically destroy its spirit, which is Dark Gaia, I believe?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of the darkness of the world. And so basically you effectively break the cycle of, you know, civilization being destroyed. And then it ends with a line that says, you know, where is it? I don't know. Oh yeah. But the earth was the only one that looked sad. And so it kind of reiterates this point of that, you know, when you build up civilization and get to a certain point of technology and you start to kind of live within that technology, you kind of forget the earth and that bond between humanity and just all living things and that of the earth. And so even though people were able to become, sorry, I'm functioning on very little sleep. So basically, able to live in a society much like ours, like the earth is sad that we're not able to recognize Mother Earth and continue on.
And then in Terra Enigma, it's again like similar but very divergent. You play a young man who's in what appears to be the last piece of human civilization in existence, and it's in the underworld. It's an idyllic town, and one day he goes into through a door he's never been through before, and literally opens Pandora's box. Everyone in the town freezes, and he's instructed that the only way he can unfreeze these people is to go out and to activate all these different towers. And when he leaves the town, you realize, I'm actually underground. There's lava all around, there's towers of crystal. It's very strange. You can see the curve of the earth above you in the game, this very dynamic Mode 7 effect. And in doing so, you do the towers, you free all the people, and that's only the beginning of the game, the very, very, very beginning. Because the Elder then sends you up to the world. Each of the towers you unlocked resurrected a continent on the surface, a real-world continent, all the continents of our Earth, whereas in Illusions of Gaia, up until the very end, after the power of the comet was turned off, it was not our world. It had our monuments, but it did not have our land masses. And in this, you see the actual full-blown resurrection of the world, because there was a terrible war long before, and the remnants were kind of locked away in the underground. So you go up and must fix things. You resurrect the land, you resurrect the plants, you resurrect the animals, you resurrect the air, you resurrect the birds, and then eventually you have to resurrect humanity and cultivate the geniuses among humanity for the prosperity of humanity, only to learn that you've been a pawn of the devil the whole time, and that all these actions, though good, are also somewhat evil or have the chance to be evil. And as such, it's very complex, like all these games. And it is easily the most emotionally complex of all of them. And throughout all this, there's a recurring theme of duality. It's not just this death and resurrection of the planet, but also that life is a series of hardships, and that there's, for everything good, there's also going to be something bad. You'll see people sacrifice themselves in these games, with much greater emotional severity than you're probably used to, and especially in an RPG of this era. I suppose we can give some examples.
Yeah. At one point, you kind of have one of the characters, she has a pet pig, and what happened, and this is an Illusion of Gaia, so she has a pet pig, and you're in this village, and they kind of censored it for the English release, but in the Japanese version, they're cannibals. And basically everyone's starving, there's no food, and also you're stuck in this village of cannibals. And then basically this pet pig, which has been this cutesy animal kind of,
Sidekick character.
Yeah, sidekick character, basically just jumps into a fire and kills itself so that everyone can eat and survive. And so for the safety of its owners and these friends that they traveled with, and it's kind of just almost jarring because it's kind of been this cutesy character, kind of a mascot character like you'd see in anime and everything. And then all of a sudden it just jumps into this fire and dies. And
yeah, imagine Mine jumping into a fire to feed the Bebop crew.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty awful, right?
Yep.
And I would say that the other sacrifices that are really remarkable in the games, because there's quite a few. One of the things that I think is really striking about these games is the feeling of consequence. And so, like I said, in Soul Blazer, which is by far the most simplistic of these games, as you could hear from the descriptions, I think I probably went into a little bit too much detail with mine, but the stories become increasingly more complicated and the themes become more complicated because it's the same developers wanted to explore the same theme and they kept kind of getting more sophisticated at how they did it. But in Soul Blazer, the scientist who much like as we watched on there, who created this weapon, who caused the destruction, winds up sacrificing himself to save the world and in a way to atone for what he's done. And then towards the end of Terra Enigma, there is the dark version of your character's girlfriend winds up sacrificing herself to save you so that the world can be saved, because she's been ordered to kill you, and she refuses. And again, it's a bit more morally complicated because Terra Enigma is more morally complicated, but there's the idea that in order for the world to be revived, people have to make sacrifices, people have to give things up. Like, there is always a cost. And you'll see that reflected, that kind of duality reflected in the worlds as well. Like Illusion of Gaia, I don't think I'll ever forget. There's this beautiful, beautiful town that you walk into, and there's like flower petals flying in the air, and the music is really soothing and pleasant. And you find out that the whole thing is running on a really brutal slave trade. And it really reinforces, like, this is this beautiful, civilized town, and here is the horrible, ugly dirt underneath it. Because that is human nature, and the developers, Quintet, are very interested in exploring the light and dark sides of human nature, and the fact that you can't and don't have one without the other.
Also, if I recall correctly, in that town, in order to get 100% completion, in Illusion of Gaia, there's an optional side quest where you have to collect these red gems. And in order to get 100% completion of all these red gems, there's a point where a slave owner is like looking for his escaped slaves, and if you rat them out, then the owner rewards you with a red gem. So it kind of like, it's almost like, it reminds me a bit of like Undertale's genocide run, that you basically have to, do something awful, and you're supposed to feel terrible about it for the sake of completing this for the sense of your own.
And that's a quest that legitimately takes the entire game to complete.
Yeah. Illusion of Gaia has a lot of points of no return, so you have to be collecting these red gems as you go through, and so once you, and then it's almost inconsequential though, it just gives you a bonus dungeon with a bonus boss that doesn't really affect the story, but just the idea that, when people play games, they have this drive to do everything in it, and this game makes you feel bad for doing that.
In a way, it's making you question the light and dark side of your own human nature.
Exactly.
Now, one thing we should touch on is the Japanese experience, because the Japanese experience the obliteration of their two cities, like completely reduced to ash by our bombs. That is, those of us who are American. They experienced something that no other civilization had really experienced outside of in mythology, when we're talking about like the flood and other ancient cataclysms. So these games are in many ways a reflection of that state of mind.
I mean, you see it in a lot of Japanese media, the concept of just post-apocalyptic settings. You have like Akira is a big one. Even Metal Gear, talks about that a lot. And it's because Japan is, by definition, a post-apocalyptic nation. And I think that sense of rebirth affected a lot of people growing up in the nation that then created a lot of the media that we've consumed from Japan. And you write what you know, and I think that's a really big thing. Like, you'll see that oftentimes just pretty much in a lot of anime, games, manga, whatever you want to think about. That's a very big recurring theme, is preventing cataclysm.
Or if not preventing cataclysm, because I think that there's an awareness that cataclysm can happen and that it can be man-made, but then the emphasis, ideally, depending on, I think, the piece that you're reading or playing or whatever, either we can come back from it or we can't. And I think that these games, with their emphasis on rebirth and resurrection, they definitely, I think they have kind of, I wouldn't even say pessimistic, but they definitely have a dark outlook on the fact that we can and will destroy ourselves, but we can also come back. My interpretation of the Earth Alone Was Sad is also there's a certain lack of awareness of the consequences of our actions on humanity.
Here's that moment specifically. The game ends with having no modern technology whatsoever, and as I mentioned, you defeat the comet, the continents reconfigure themselves into recognizable shapes, and it has this monologue talking about the world was filled with villages, and the villages were filled with smiling faces. They looked different from the villages and how they used to look. And it says, but the Earth was the only one that looked sad. And that's how the game ends, more or less. There's a little sort of message of hope about the characters, but the overall message about the world is this.
I almost, there's so many different interpretations to this, which again, we'll tie it back into Mother 3 a little bit later, but just Mother 3 having a very ambiguous ending as well. But I think, and then being open to a lot of interpretations, I think one thing is that I almost see it as like a sort of like mother-child relationship between the Earth and its people. And it's almost like when a mother has a child and that child does not necessarily grow up to fulfill what that mother wants to do or wants their child to do. And then the mother is just like, kind of like sad and despondent, but at the same time it's like, well, at least I still have my child. I've created this, and that unconditional love. But at the same time, it's also, we should recognize the earth and our parents even, and because they brought us into this world. And I think that symbiotic nature and that sense of just ownership and kind of loving enough to let go is definitely another theme that is explored amongst the games, in a sense.
So, do you guys mind if we go into some of the historical and cultural context?
Please, that's why I brought up the Angkor Wat slide.
Oh, excellent! Look at this. I'm reading Cap's mind. So we talk about how this, I think, at least we are in agreement. You may disagree on how this kind of interest in destruction and resurrection comes from perhaps uniquely Japanese experience. The idea of resurrection in general is more international and cross-generational relevance. I think it's really interesting to look specifically at some of the locations in Illusion of Gaia. As he was saying, the real world. Sometimes it's just like, oh, this was just a really cool thing that people know, like the the lines, the
Nazca lines.
The Nazca
which
lines.
is in Peru, the animal shapes you can see from the air.
We don't know what those are, so we can't say whether those are relevant to the theme of resurrection or not. So it's clear that Quintet was like, here's a cool, mysterious thing that we can make cool and mysterious. But they did choose. Gosh, sorry.
Incan ruins.
Incan ruins, which is interesting. I don't know if you guys have studied some of the Central and South American people's cultures, but there was again the emphasis of duality. There's two worlds: the world of the earth and the world of the gods. And there's like a kind of fluidity of motion. You can go from one to the other, and death is moving that way. And so I've read and I've heard that part of why human sacrifice wasn't considered the same way in those cultures as it would be in ours, say, is because it's kind of a permeable barrier between life and death, and you can kind of move between them. So there's definitely this idea of resurrection, of personal resurrection, of not like a hard and fast ending, but continuing. And then there's also the pyramids of ancient Egypt, which Egypt had a very interesting relationship with, or ancient Egypt had a very interesting relationship with death as well, where there was this life, sure, but then there's the afterlife, and that's the one we need to pay attention to. And so there were like all these great monuments to death and celebration of death, because it was the continuation of life, not just ending. And I think that this kind of idea is really interesting to humans for a lot of reasons, and that's why it keeps popping up in different cultures, and I think that's part of why it came into these games.
Yeah, and Angkor Wat was originally a Hindu temple, and Hinduism and the samsara, they're really important to the notions of reincarnation as they permeated Western culture and certainly Eastern culture, of course. Samsara is the continuing cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, cyclicality of all life, matter, and existence. And this is a fundamental assumption of all Indian religions. So that sense of reincarnation is very powerful, and we see these Hindu scriptures specifically referenced in a lot of ways in the nature in which the earth is born and reborn and annihilated and so on in these quintet games. Like, it seems to have an extremely strong Hindu background. We don't know the personal backgrounds of any of the people who were writing, but it's very, very present. And what you were mentioning, Adil, before about the Mother-Earth relationship, Will, the main character of Illusion of Gaia, at one point, at the very end, speaks to his mother's soul, and she does say that Earth is a mother with millions of children. So we have this relationship with our parents, and then we can be the rowdy, weird kids, and maybe we'll make her proud, or maybe we won't. Maybe we'll do something pretty bad. So that's for us to decide, though, and that's really what the games are all about, is us deciding. It's sort of presenting the realities and having us, as an audience, react to them.
I think dialing it back just a little bit, is that even in our own lives and society and everything, we have that concept as well. So there's this quote from the New York Herald Tribune in 1947, and so it says, "When the first atomic bomb exploded in New Mexico, the desert sand turned to fused green glass. This fact, according to the magazine Free World, has given certain archaeologists a turn. They have been digging in the ancient Euphrates Valley and have uncovered a layer of agrarian culture 8,000 years old, and a layer of herdsman culture much older, and a still older caveman culture. Recently, they reached another layer, a layer of fused green glass. And so even Oppenheimer, when they had asked him about the first atomic bomb to ever be detonated, his reply was, well, yes, in modern history. And I think there are a lot of people that feel that, this civilization that we live in now is not necessarily the first one to have been this advanced. And that, maybe there was a cataclysm, thousands and thousands and thousands of years prior that has wiped everything clean. And, I don't want to drag politics into this, but there is definitely the risk of a cataclysm in our modern world with everything that's going on. And that's something that, ultimately is up to us whether that occurs or doesn't.
Yeah, and Oppenheimer, in that video we played, he quoted the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hindu text. It's part of the Samsara. Like, he was familiar with all of this, and then there's that weird, ominous thing of like, well, it was the first modern nuclear explosion. It's very, very interesting what he may have believed on the subject, though I don't know that he ever definitively said anything. So there's a whole subculture, a modern mythology, if you will, tapping into the notions of a previously existing culture with atomic weapons and so on. In fact, there's a translation of the Bhagavad Gita that was, you may have seen this around, where it kind of turns that scripture into a strange sci-fi reference of gods battling with nuclear weapons. As fanciful and kind of awesome as that idea is, it's actually a complete mistranslation, so don't believe the hype. But it's still a really, really, really cool piece of scripture, actually. Grant Morrison, the famous comic book author, is currently adapting it in comic book form through Graphic India, and I highly recommend it. So let's talk about Terranigma. This is what this slide's from. This is one of the most famous Terranigma images. It was called The Creation of Heaven and Earth in Japan, or Tenshi Sozo. It opens with this opening crawl. Since the beginning of Earth, the external light side, the surface world, stood for growth, whereas the internal dark side, the underworld, represented decline. Over the course of billions of years, these two forces came to be called God and Devil. In this battle, neither side won. There's still evidence of the battle left over the scarred Earth, not just the fact that the continents have been locked beneath like some kind of weird system of towers in the underworld, but there's like actual gigantic skulls in Antarctica, presumably of angels. And this is the world that Terranigma takes place in, our world, but a world seen through the lens of this myth of there having been a cataclysm. It doesn't seem like there's actually a main enemy in the game for a really, really long time, until all of a sudden you find this weird technological facility up in the mountains of Russia and unlock this guy named Baruga, a cryogenic scientist, the last living soul from the previous Earth, who created a virus called Asmodeus, which is a king of demons in Judeo-Christian mythology. And it's engineered to kill insignificant life and turn the rest, mostly humans, into drones, to create sort of what he views as a perfect society. It's a little bit typical megalomaniacal villain stuff, but interesting nonetheless, because here's a force from, like, our demons literally come back to haunt us as a new society is trying to be built, an innocent society more or less, and this guy comes back and is trying to enslave everything and annihilate everything. And this taps into the argument of nature versus technology. As I mentioned off the top, everything's a balance, right? We have such advanced technology, we have the ability to work with nature, and oftentimes it's so much easier to not consider the many ways that our technology can affect nature, which is something that we're struggling with so very much now. For example, I grew up in South Florida. I have to live now with the knowledge that within my lifetime, the place where I grew up will be completely uninhabitable due to global warming. Like, the statistics are there, sea level rise is reality, we're already seeing the signs of it. My hometown's gonna be destroyed. I've been living with that for a couple of years now, knowing that that's a reality. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to cope with this changing world, and we're seeing our effects on it now. So hopefully, we won't have to take it to the point of oblivion before you are ready to make some change. And I feel like that's one of the biggest messages that this trilogy of games, as well as Mother 3, has to offer.
Yeah, I mean, Mother 3 has a lot of these ideas, just about nature versus technology. Like, if you just look at the Mother 3 logo, that is a mixture of metal and wood and, do you have a picture of that?
I don't have the logo on this,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Okay, well,
Here's the destruction of the Nowhere Islands.
But yeah, so you have the destruction of the Nowhere Islands, and it starts similar to Terranigma in the sense that it's just this kind of like closed society that is self-sufficient and doesn't have any sort of interaction with any outside world. And then things start to change, and things start to happen, and technology starts to become like have a stronger grip on this town, and it's portrayed negatively. It definitely is. And I think if you look at the logo, it's like a sort of like wood, this natural logo that is then being fused with technology. And then when you beat the game and the logo is shown to close out the game, it's made entirely of wood, like kind of showing a happy ending. But when you think about the ending for Mother 3, it's very ambiguous, and I think everyone has their own interpretation of what that means and what happened. And I know even Itoi, the ending changed between when it was Earthbound 64, when it was supposed to be more dark, and Itoi was more depressed, and he wanted to have it a darker, kind of more depressing ending, to when Mother 3 was released for the GBA, and that was more ambiguously happy, and he was feeling better about it. I think part of that might have even been the development, because the N64 development was just so troubled, whereas GBA was a lot easier and straightforward. So, but yeah.
Yeah, dive into it.
Okay, yeah, so one of the things, I'm a lit major, I'm sorry guys, but so I'm really interested in looking at like themes and authorial intent. And I think that one of the most powerful things about media is that it can affect us. And I think that people who tell stories often choose to tell the stories that they do because they want to get something across to us. And I feel like Quintet is making a cautionary tale. They're showing us the dark side of human nature, but they also want us to leave with a note of hope because, and again, I've never talked to them, I don't know this, but just having played a number of their games, including like EVO, if any of you guys ever played that, the Search for Eden, yeah, had a lot of these same themes too, and the idea that life and death are inevitable, and that darkness isn't necessarily bad. There's even in Soul Blazer, there is this father and son who are shipwrecked. They die of thirst on a raft. You find this out because you meet dolphins who are the reincarnation of them. And so here is this incredibly tragic, a child dying on a raft is pretty terrible, and yet it has this hope at the end. And I think that Quintet wants us to walk away with, thinking about the love and the hope of the future, but also the cautionary tale that we can cause our own destruction. And I think that Itoi really, really, really wants to hammer that home in Mother 3, which I'm really interested in. I just beat Mother 3 for the first time, 4 weeks ago, so I'm all fired up and ready to talk about the ending. But I think one of the things that's most significant about the Mother series is Pokey as a villain. Sorry, I call him Pokey. I know he's Porky in Mother 3, but he's Pokey to me. That he's a child who has been mistreated, and consequently his worst nature comes out, and it is very human. He's not this megalomaniacal monster who just wants to take over the world for no good reason. He's an angry, broken child. And even when he grows up to be an angry, broken, violent, destructive adult, his actions still stem from human emotion, and that makes him, in my opinion, a lot more terrifying than Beluga from Terranigma, who's just kind of evil. Because we could give into our worst nature. If we don't see people who are broken and help fix them before they become Pokey, they could become Pokey.
Pokey is really the representation of the worst case scenario of humanity. He's greedy, he's malignant.
But the interesting thing is that he starts off as a child.
Yes.
He's a child, and you see why he is the way he is.
He's a child, and if he just was treated a little bit differently, he could have been your friend.
Yeah, and so it's very interesting to kind of reinforce that darkness could be in us, and also that we have the power to stop that darkness. And I think that that's also kind of, for me, what the ending of Mother 3 is all about. When I first beat it, and then there's the black screen, you don't get any resolution for the characters, and everyone's like, well, things are fine. But I was like, well, I want to know what happens to the family, are they okay? What does the world look like? How does this work? That doesn't matter. Because as far as I can tell, Itoi wants to say, he even reaches through and says, hey, player, by your name, look at this. You have the power to go out, you fixed this little world in a game, great. You have the power to go out into your real world and make that difference. You can find the people who are broken and are hurting and who might hurt others, and you can stop that. You can see the way that humans are destroying their world, and you can stop that. And like for me, that's a really powerful sentiment, and I don't think he's very subtle about it, but I also think it's an important message to get across. So for me, that's one of the things that is so powerful about Mother 3, and that's its real world relevance.
Can we afford subtlety anymore? I don't think we can. Like I think it's gone too far.
But I mean, how old is Mother 3 even then?
Yeah, I mean, there was still time enough to make some more changes there. Hopefully, it helped a bit.
Yeah.
At least in Japan, before it was translated by the fine people at Fangamer, and now they've given the gift to the world of. I mean, Toei's message of do something, damn it! Like make a change, make a difference. Because if we're lazy about it, if we're lazy about life and just let it happen and don't actively like look to how the world can be improved, then nothing will ever really get better. It'll only, animals make waste. And that waste can fertilize the ground, but it also can just be waste if it just keeps piling and piling on. You have to do something with it. You have to be active. You have to spread yourself around and do good. And I mean, I'm sorry I'm using waste as an analogy, but
How about we talk about Michael Jackson's song "Man in the Mirror"? If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make that change. Start with yourself, and you go and then help others, and in helping others, you also help yourself. Don't make a Porky or a certain politician that we can all, I mean, if you really think about it, he has so much in common with Porky. This is self-centered, it's just, the idea is that, you let people go unhinged for so long, and at some point, I mean, you can see in Mother 3, part of Porky's plight is that he just wanted to have a friend in Ness. You see at the end, when he has this museum of everything in Earthbound, it's kind of him having this nostalgia for what he feels was like a better time in his life. And it's part of it is a connection to the player, making you feel nostalgia for the Mother series, because you have the intro to Mother 1 playing, and then you also see all the different things from Mother 2 and the other and the series. But then it's also just from Porky's perspective, it's him trying to, at least make some kind of statement to what life is and what he wanted and what he didn't get.
Yeah, well, the moment that we find Ness's yo-yo enshrined in King Peace room, I just broke down crying, because I was like, this is a little boy who wanted a friend, and instead he's kind of turned into a monster and destroyed everything. Although it wasn't just Pokey that destroyed the world, it was society.
yeah, well, that's one of the things that I thought most haunting about Mother 3 is that you get the knowledge that something, we don't know what happened, but the world ended. And somehow they managed to create a last bastion of humanity, much like in Terranigma, though, that was done for completely different purposes. And this last bastion it's a rural lifestyle. There's no real technology outside of very simple agrarian tools. And then it's polluted by technology, and that's when it just ramps up all of a sudden, industrial revolution, full speed ahead, into this catastrophic human excess. And there's just so much to be said about that, because you think, if you're connecting with the world of Earthbound, you're thinking, what went wrong? I saved the world, and something still went wrong, and I don't know when it happened. I don't know if it happened millions of years in the future. I don't know when this happened. And that was I think one of those jarring parts of me when I got to the end and I realized the full scope of what the world I was playing in actually meant. That it wasn't just some fanciful corner of the universe. It was this is all that's left. And somehow they managed to survive, and then the last great malignance of humanity comes in and very easily manipulates them to just destroy themselves.
And yet I don't think that it's a hopeless ending.
Yeah.
I think that it makes a point of not being hopeless. So I think that I think that these games and their creators are very, very aware of the destructive potential of humanity.
Right.
But
yeah.
I think they want us to take away from it, but I guess we probably want you to take away from this, which is that we can make that change, and we must.
I mean, and if you're here at Camp Fangamer, you've played some deep games. You're thoughtful people who've connected with some very thoughtful pieces of writing, and we're the people who can make a difference together. We all wield the power of friendship. There's been 2 panels about friendship today already. We're about to have kind of another one just after this, talking about the Starman.net moderation team. So we have to use these powers for good, and I'm sorry to get preachy, but I'm also not sorry because, we should all feel empowered. That's what this is about.
I feel like there's no kinder community on the internet than the mother community, and I think that that's what makes us, this community, which I'm really honored to be able to say I belong to now, special. And I think that we have that power. We've grown up with people telling us that love is important and can save the world, and I think it can. And I think if we know that and we believe it in our hearts, we can do that. Cheesy as it might sound.
These games aren't cynical. Like they wear their emotions on their sleeve.
They're realistic.
Yeah.
In a sense. They're practical, but like at the same time hopeful. And I think having that sense of optimism that there's always a hope, and even after total destruction, there's still seeds of life that are still being planted. Besides all that destruction, and that there is going to be some sense of rebirth. And I think even if you consider humanity in our world, we have this very sort of like narcissistic idea that humans will be completely wiped out, but that doesn't mean that life is wiped out. That life always finds a way, and it could just be as simple as just trees or plants or algae or fungi or whatever it may be, and life continues. And maybe that's just pushing back, and then evolution starts again, and who knows what happens from that point.
But how many cycles until we learn our lesson? Like learning from the past is a huge part of all of this, especially the quintet games. And these games, these stories, any stories like this in any medium whatsoever, they give us this perspective of being able to look down at the planet and see it for what it is. A vista that so few human beings have ever seen with their own eyes. And when Earthrise, the famous photograph Earthrise, was first published, it's just started this huge wave of environmental consciousness, but most of us grew up with that. Like, we're used to the concept of being able to see our planet from the outside. We have to really realize how incredible it is to even see such a thing, to even be able to reproduce an image like that, to get the perspective that comes with something as powerful as that image, to kind of rediscover the power of that image, and to be like these characters here, talking to the spirits of their parents, I might add, looking down on Earth. Will's father, one of these glowing spirits here, he says, when I lost my body, I started seeing everything. So we need to use the gaze of fiction to look at the reality of our own world and start to see everything, and to shape the way that we live for the better, because these amazing authors have provided us with a very powerful perspective on the nature of life. So with that, thanks so much for being here. You can find us all around the panel, and if you want to keep talking about some dark weirdness in Earthbound at 5, I'm doing a panel all about that. And if you want to hear us talk more about Terranigma, on Nerdy Show, the podcast network I run, we did a special talking all about that. So not just the themes we discussed here tonight, but the actual game development and nuances of that. You can find that all at nerdyshow.com. We have a bunch of flyers down there on the table. And now it's time to find out which one of you is going to walk away with one of the greatest games of all time.
Also, I'm working in the console room. If anyone wants to play Terranigma, I will totally set it up for you, or pretty much any Super Nintendo Genesis game. If you want to play Captain Novolin or something, the game about diabetes. I will totally set that up for you. Yes, do you have a question?
I do. How much of Quintet's other output shares these kind of themes?
All of it, actually.
Yeah, all of it. They also made ActRaiser.
Yeah.
And the games that weren't released by Quintet by name, that had the same team, like if you played Grunstreak Saga or EVO, both of those share a lot of the same themes.
The only Quintet experience I have is RoboShrek.
Oh,
Okay.
that's the one I don't know, but I've been told
Yeah.
I need to play it, and I don't know.
Does it have that theme? I mean, I haven't played it either.
It felt like Pokemon's dad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which is interesting because Mother is almost literally Pokemon's dad.
Yeah.
And now, guys,
It very much like
I really want to, we want to keep this discussion going. We actually do have to get our way off the stage. So if you've got questions or anything, stick around. We'll keep talking. Let's get this prize won, and then we can keep going.
Who wants to do the honors?
You should do it. You're needing it so nicely.
All right, let's see.
Jerry?
Well done, Jerry.
Thank you guys, you've been a fantastic audience. If you do want to stick around and talk, I'd be really excited to hear what questions you have.
Let's get a picture with Jerry.
Yes, let's get a picture with Jerry.
Actually, anybody wants to get a picture, get a picture.
Yeah, let's all get a picture together.